books that I've been reading recently, and the first book I'm beginning with is Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf. It follows the story of Clarissa Dalloway as she plans a party in London, and it takes place over the course of one day. It also follows the story of a character unrelated to Clarissa, a man called Septimus, who's a World War I veteran suffering with shell shock and contemplating suicide. One of the major themes in the novel is death. As Clarissa looks back at her past, she's wondering whether her life was worth it and fulfilled, and also thinking of the fact that once she's gone, there'll be nothing remaining of her in the world. Septimus is thinking whether death is just the beginning and whether there's more in the afterlife. Linked to looking at the past plays a major importance in the novel. Don't laugh at major importance, we'll edit that out. Past plays a big significance in the novel. Clarissa introduces her old friends into the story, in particular Peter, who once proposed to her, and her old friend Sally Seton. Sally Seton signifies the fact that neither her or Clarissa became what they thought they were going to be when they were younger. I think that Mrs. Dalloway accomplished what The Great Gatsby set out to do. It really shows the glamour of the 1920s and the difference in class divide. We see the rich, wealthy lifestyle of Clarissa and the servants that she has in her home. In her home. I love Virginia Woolf's unique writing style, the fact that it's very poetic and it contains a lot of similes and analogies, and it really flows. We see the glamour of the 1920s with cars, telephones and the latest fashions. I think it's definitely worth reading and one of my favourite classic novels. The next one I'm going to talk about is The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime. I'm sure many people have read this, but I've only just read it myself. Although it's intended for a younger audience, I would definitely recommend reading it. It was such an interesting insight into Asperger's syndrome. It follows the story of Christopher Boone, who is 15 years old, and he discovers that his neighbour's dog has been murdered. He then goes on a quest to find out who killed the dog, and while he does this, he decides to write his own detective novel. As you read it, you sort of feel as though you're part of the story itself because you're in the book as he's writing it, which is really cool. It's got a very interesting style, as the pages are numbered in prime numbers and they include sort of diagrams. And unlike Mrs. Dalloway, the writing is very literal. There's not a lot of adjectives or anything like that. And yeah, I really enjoyed it and I'd recommend it. Another book that I've read is The Colour Purple by Alice Walker. I absolutely love this, and I'd go as far as to say it's one of my favourite books of all time. We actually covered it in school, but I'm sure many of you didn't pay attention to books you read in school either. I've come to reading quite late. It follows the story of Celie and charts her abuse by men over her lifetime. It starts off as she's abused by her pa, who then marries her off to a man who's only referred to as Mr. in the book, and it's set in epistolary form, which is letters. She initially writes them to God as she has no one else to talk to. Another central theme in this book is the relationship between women and their empowerment. There's a very strong relationship between her and her sister Nettie, who she didn't want to marry Mr., and also between Shug, who is her husband's former flame, who she becomes besotted with. It also looks at segregation between black and white. It's not clear when this book is set, but it's in the Deep South, and that becomes, I don't want to give too much away, but that also becomes quite prevalent and is very interesting given today's current climate. Another thing to look at in the book is the way that God is presented. Celie makes clear that she pictures God as being a white man, but as we see her fall away from becoming repressed by men to becoming an independent woman, she takes away this idea of God and she starts addressing her letters to dear God, dear trees, as she sees God in everything. I love this book, and despite its strong themes, it's very uplifting in the end, and I really, really enjoyed it. Another book I've read is Emma by Jane Austen. Emma by Jane Austen. So this follows Emma Woodhouse, who lives in a town called, Highbury. And Emma thinks she's a very good matchmaker after just marrying off her governess to someone. She's 20 years old and she's a member of the wealthiest family in her village, and she's very aware of this. She sees herself as superior to others in her village, and ultimately her meddling ends in disaster. The key male figure in this novel is Mr. Knightley, who is the only one who feels able to criticise Emma. They have a very interesting dynamic in the novel, and at the beginning she sets her sights on a girl called Harriet Smith, who she's keen to marry off well, despite the fact that her parentage is unknown. Emma's a really interesting character. I'm not sure how much I like her, but she's definitely good to critique. Yeah, it follows Jane Austen's previous themes of ignoring social and political climates in that time to focus on the silliness of the main female character or protagonist, and highlight the importance of small problems. It's very funny and very witty, and is one of my preferred Jane Austen novels. And the last book I've read is One Day, which I struggled to put down. This is by David Nicholls, and it looks at the main characters Emma and Dexter, who have a relationship over 20 years. It begins with a one-night stand in Edinburgh that turns into a surprising relationship. It's not a typical romantic novel in the fact that Dexter is far from a Mr. Knightley or a Mr. Darcy. The characters have obvious flaws, and it follows a will they won't they path till the end of the novel, but I won't give anything away. I'll definitely be getting one of David Nicholls' other novels, as I thoroughly enjoyed this.